Welcome to Finding Medina. Bonus episode number 2, the most important primary account of the Battle of Medina. I'm Brandon Seal. This is a podcast dedicated to the Battle of Medina. Yet in some way, I've come to feel that historical projects that devote all their time to battles do a profound disservice to the lives of the people that we profess to be studying. Defining entire historical periods by battles would be like defining a human life by viewing only a wedding video, or maybe a divorce proceeding is a better analogy. The outcomes of battles, weddings, and divorce proceedings are all important, of course, and they're all cinematic and high-stakes affairs. But in the end, they're brief and not particularly representative of what the rest of life is like. Throughout this series, I've kind of actively withheld one source from you so that I could save it for now. It is, to my knowledge, the only known Republican primary account of the battle and the aftermath written by a Tejano. Tellingly, the battle occupies only about 10% of the account. The rest is taken up with narrating the individual horrors suffered by the civilians of San Antonio, particularly the women, after Arredondo's Royalist army sacked and occupied the town. This makes it probably a more accurate rendering of the experience of the people in Texas in 1813 than the dozen or so battle-only accounts that we've reviewed. After the really emotional feedback that we received for our reading of the original Texas Declaration of Independence, we've decided to recreate that experience here as well. This, too, is one of those documents that needs to be entered into the historical record and made accessible to all students of Texas history. Because, as we'll see, you can't understand what happens next in Texas history if you don't understand what happened here. Again, my friend Joe Arciniega offered his time and talents to help record this for posterity. So with that, let's listen here to the report of the most notable events that befell Bear in 1813 under the orders of the tyrant, Arredondo.
A report of the most notable events that befell Béjar in 1813 under the orders of the tyrant, Arredondo. The Royalist troops had advanced as far as the Encinal de Medina, aiming to destroy the forces, American and Mexican, assembled under the command of General Toledo. Emboldened by their past success, animated by love of their patria, and trusting in their unsurpassed valor, the forces of independence resolved to seek out the enemy and surprise them on their route of march against the wishes of their general. Unfortunately for them, and indeed for the people of this community, things did not go as planned. Lured by Colonel Elizondo into the thick brush of the Encinal, whose sandy soil runs the better part of 15 leagues through the area, the Republicans found their horses bogged down, sinking, atascándose up to their knees. In the middle of this expanse, they met the enemy, Royalist army, which was awaiting them on firm, favorable ground, rested, well-ordered, and with their entire battery of artillery posted up front. The brave Republicans thus arrived on the battlefield with their horses so fatigued that they could barely maneuver. But despite the desperate situation in which they found themselves, they committed to the battle with such bravery and energy that they very nearly overwhelmed the Royalists, who withered under their assault. It was then that the clever tyrant, General Arredondo, devised a scheme to reinvigorate his troops. In the confusion of the battle, he ordered his buglers to sound out the notes of victory. The familiar sound animated his troops and struck fear into the Republican ranks. They hesitated. Just then, the Republicans saw their most valiant and intrepid leader, Colonel Miguel Menchaca, fall, fatally injured. The field, covered with dead, soon fell to the Royalists. Only a handful escaped the battle to endure the cruelty and incredible tyranny of the defenders of the absolute monarch in whose hands the patriotic citizens of Béjar had now fallen. It isn't easy to put on paper what this town suffered, or even to narrate with much certainty exactly what happened after the battle, because so many of those who could have borne true witness to those events have died, and many of the rest took part in the oppression and tyranny of their own countrymen, and thus will not tell the truth, and indeed, in many cases, have conspired for years to obscure it. This is why the majority of people to this day do not realize the role that the Department of Texas played in liberating her glorious patria, and why she still does not occupy her rightful place alongside Guadalajara, Valladolid, Zacatecas, Oaxaca, Puebla, Veracruz, and others. Nevertheless, a few of her most notable deeds can be salvaged, and they will be described now without unnecessary eloquence or embellishment, without exaggeration, hyperbole, or flattery, and marked only with the seal of truth. Let us get to work then. Vamos a la obra, and let the people know the truth and repay our work in recording it by overlooking any defects in our narrative. As a result of the defeat in the Encinal de Medina, entire families fled from San Antonio to save their own lives, escaping to the United States. Some walked, some rode, but all suffered innumerable struggles, anguishes, and hardships, not to mention the loss of everything they own: their houses, their farms, their livestock, and all other goods they couldn't pack with them. Chief among these families were the patriotic and incomparable Arrochas. Joaquin Leal, with his wife, Ana Maria, and their 4 sons and 3 daughters, who left San Antonio in a panic at 4 o'clock on that fateful August 18th, with only a sack of corn gathered from their own fields to sustain them. They walked 12 days through the deserts and fields, with Jesus' name on their lips, stunned and terrified by all that had happened, and ever fearful that their enemies might descend upon them at any moment. They were soon joined by Miguel de Arrocha and Ángela Arrocha, with their 3 sons, Antonio, Francisco, and Ignacio Delgado. On the 30th of August, just 12 days removed from the battle, the Loma del Toro came into sight across the Trinity River, no more than a rifle shot away. Just then, they heard the terrible shout of Royalist soldiers. A second lieutenant, Fernando Rodriguez, appeared and yelled to them, "Halt, rebels, traitors to your king! Halt, or I will kill you all!" Hardly had the words left his mouth when 14 soldiers surrounded the poor refugees like ravenous wolves hungry for the kill, and fired without further warning. Antonio Delgado fell dead almost immediately. The Royalists showed no mercy even then, throwing off Delgado's wailing mother and spearing Delgado's corpse, despite his mother's pleas to let him live, or at the very least, to let him confess his sins. Lieutenant Rodriguez responded indignantly. "He can confess himself to the devil. He and the rest of you are all damned already." Enraged, he flipped his lance around and began to beat Ángela Arrocha de Delgado over her pious screams. Once and for all, they ripped her away from her son's corpse, stripped it, and left it for the wild animals. The rest of the men were bound and were marched together with the women back to Elizondo as prize of war. When Elizondo saw them, he asked, "What families are these?" Lieutenant Rodriguez replied, "They are the Leales, Arrochas, and Delgados." "Then they all deserve death," Elizondo responded. Immediately, Father Camacho was brought before them to hear their confessions. Ana Maria and Ángela Arrocha de Delgado begged Elizondo to spare their lives, but he refused to hear them. "Take those rebels out of my sight before I order them killed. A fine example they have set for their children, you four," he said to the 4 armed soldiers nearby. "Take these women away and tie them up." Only a few escaped. 2 daughters of the patriot Manuel Delgado and Ángela Arrocha, 20-year-old Candida and the younger Maria Josefa, as well as their sister-in-law Antonia Rodriguez. They thrust themselves into the dangerous Trinity River rather than fall into the hands of such a cruel enemy and swam to safety. Candida clutching to her breast her little niece, whose mother was captured by the tyrannical Fernando and marched off with the rest. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, those who were about to become martyrs to their patria had confessed their sins and been brought before a firing squad, in plain view of their mothers and sisters. They lifted their heads and spoke bravely. "Farewell, mother and sisters, until we walk together again in the valley of Josaphat." When one mother heard her sons bidding their last goodbye, she collapsed to the ground. Her young daughter, Maria de la Consolación, rushed to support her fainting mother with one arm, while embracing in the other an image of the Black Christ of Esquipulas, pleading through her tears for consolation and strength for her anguished mother. The saddest night followed for these women, full of a sadness and pain, alone, disempowered, camped now beside the executioners of their brave insurgents, and with no more covering than the tunics and shirts they had been wearing. Before dawn could end that sleepless night, the women agree among themselves to seek out the bodies of their dead brothers. They found them in a field nearby, where animals had already commenced their awful work. Seeing such inhumanity, they summoned the courage to petition the cruel Elizondo that they be permitted to bury the men themselves. Elizondo refused to oblige them. He replied only that these men, who had in fact spilled their blood on the field of glory for their patria, were damned traitors to king and country. The survivors spent several unhappy days in that infernal spot, with their souls shattered and suffering as many evils as could be expected from the defenders of a tyrannical despot king. Finally, when the water of the place had been polluted from the bodies of over 100 dead, Elizondo decided that it was time to return with his triumphant troop to the capital, San Antonio. He wished to present to Arredondo his prisoners and to brag to him of the unarmed men he had tricked into surrendering and then killed. He never made it to San Antonio, however. Just as they were crossing the Guadalupe River, Elizondo was fatally injured, along with Don Isidro, his brother-in-law, by a European captain under his command, who lost his mind after seeing such cruelty and butchery. Colonel Quintero took over command, and from day one he forced the women, 114 in all, married, widowed, unmarried, and maiden, to remain on their feet in the brutal August sun from 5 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, some with their babies still nursing at their breast. Next, as a precautionary security measure, this new vizier ordered that an inventory be taken of the men and women and their belongings, with the goal of collecting all their papers and money. For this honorable task, he commissioned his most trusted lackeys, those known for their devotion to monarchy and declared antipathy to their patria. First Lieutenants José María Jiménez, Tomás Saucedo, Second Lieutenants Servando Rodríguez, Señor Chapa, Diego Jiménez, Leandro and Miguel Cavazos, and others who took the lead on this humiliating and shameful operation, inspecting the men with such vigor and scrupulous attention to detail that not even their shoes escaped review. They made the women get down from their mounts so that they might endure the same examination in compliance with the orders of Vizier Quintero. So well and fully did they carry out their duty that not a single breast from even the most modest, decent maiden was left untouched in this perverted exercise. The next day, Colonel Quintero decided to simultaneously increase the security of his march and the suffering of the true patriots. He gave the order that all men should be bound and forced to march barefoot. Those most honored patriots, Tomás Arrocha, Fernando Veramendi, and Clemente Delgado, led by example despite their diminished estate and half dead from thirst, hunger, and fatigue. They arrived at around 3 in the afternoon to Cibolo Creek. There, our brothers quenched their thirst, while their enemies forced them through the water with blows from the lances and shoves, much as you might drive a herd of goats or a passel of hogs. The following day, our patriotic brothers suffered the same torturous conditions of march. They arrived at Salado Creek, underfed, thirsty, and mistreated. It was here, one day out from San Antonio, that Duz Quintero decided to notify General Arredondo of his imminent arrival. So as to better draw attention to his triumph and to better torment, defame, and humiliate his captured rebels, he ordered the men and women separated so that they might be marched into San Antonio, bound together, and marched on foot in front of his regiment. Thus bound, they were turned over to the permanent regiment of Béjar, which had come out to meet them. With the cord of prisoners in tow, they arrived at vespers that evening at the Alamo, which is on the outskirts of the town on the eastern side of the river. Not wanting to deprive himself of proper lighting for such a brilliant entrance before his cruel, vengeful, and tyrannical general, and wanting to make it all the more bitter for our martyr patriots, he postponed his arrival until 10 a.m. the next morning, which was to be carried out to the sounds of whistles and drums. The next morning, he assembled his prisoners in good order and marched them across the San Antonio River toward the plazas, with old Lieutenant Rodriguez driving along the women with his lance. They crossed the river, stumbling and falling, the water up to their waists. Having taken the road that leads from the river to the main plaza, Arredondo's entire army formed around the prisoners, the soldiers shamelessly hurling insults at them. "Ah, look how bashful the ladies are now. Where was that modesty when they were firing pistols at us?" The poor afflicted women could do little more than endure those insults with their eyes cast to the ground, holding back tears and muffling their sobs, denying the tyrants around them the pleasure of seeing them suffer. They arrived in the plaza where the chief tyrant Arredondo awaited them, accompanied by his hangers-on and lackeys such as Cristobal Dominguez and his like, and surrounded by nearly 1,000 lookers-on. When all of the prisoners had at last been marched in front of him, a gypsy grin creased his face, and he began to mock the poor women with a song that they had composed in an earlier, more hopeful time. "Here comes the one-eyed Arredondo, come to mess with the Texans. He must think that we are sheep, like the men who march with Elizondo. Ah, but look how the sheep have become lions," Arredondo added. "Mírenme bien. What do you think of me now? Am I one-eyed? Who was it among you who said you would barbecue my balls and eat them for supper? I tell you what, you can eat them raw right here if you wish." One San Antonio woman, Josefa Arocha, tried to respond to Arredondo. You should know that Josefa Arocha was a hard woman and a fierce Republican. She had offered 500 pesos for the head of her husband, Pedro Trevino, who had fought with the Royalist troops in the battle. When she tried to answer the tyrant, he cut her off, burning with rage. Here, his second-in-command, Dominguez, interjected, asking, "Where is the one to whom San Francisco de Paula appeared holding the trousers of an American? The one who called you to see the miracle that San Francisco would work with American aid, that promised you that victory would be yours, that you would best the Cachupines? Ha!" One small girl, bound with the rest of the prisoners, recognized a Spaniard in the plaza, a man named Rosie, whom she had known in more peaceful times. She implored him, "Sir, will you please take me with you?" Bless the poor innocent child. She was quickly disappointed by her old friend. Emphatically, he responded, "Not for a second. I've been suffering for 3 years because of you lot," revealing with his words his own cowardice and desperation to please the tyrant and other spectators. Having inspected the male prisoners and abusing them in 1,000 ways, the unholy general turned his attention one last time to the women, asking his lackeys, "What should we do to these she-rebels?" He did not wait for a reply. He answered his own question, sentencing the unfortunate women as loudly as he could. "A la quinta! A la quinta! to grind hot corn for the troops of the king. His bloodthirsty soldiers then escorted them to a large warehouse known as the Quinta, where a particularly fierce and sick jailer awaited them named Sergeant Major Acosta. As the women entered their prison, Acosta greeted them with obscenities and insults in the most magisterial and pompous tone. He shouted at them, "What did you think would happen to you, rebel horse? Riding around on saddles like men, grasping the saddle horn for all to see." And this was not even the worst of the abuse he showered on them. Acosta placed 8 other men to guard the imprisoned women and soon distributed 8 metates and 4 fanegas of corn for them to grind, corn which had been harvested, it should be noted, from the women's own fields. These heroic women, true daughters of Anahuac, labored at this task for 54 days from 2 in the morning until 10 at night every night. Some shucked the corn, others soaked and cooked it to make hominy, others scrubbed and hulled it with their feet while it was still hot, until their feet and legs were raw and their toenails fell out and their own living blood mixed with the corn they were hulling. One woman named Crisanta died in the course of this inhuman exercise, having scorched her palms and lost her fingernails. Others were made to grind the corn, and coming as they did from all classes of the community, many of the women had never done this before, accustomed instead to being kept in ribbons as distinguished ladies in the society of the capital, and their delicate hands suffered much from the toil. Despite their fatigue, each day the jailer Acosta invented new ways to punish, embarrass, and humiliate our proud Mexican women, hurling at them the basest and most shameful insult. This little Nero took pleasure in his cruelty, resorting to the grossest, indecent, ugly, and impure words and deeds, which I cannot even bear to write on the page. He whipped these women at his whim, denying even young mothers the chance to nurse their infants, who cried day and night from hunger. One died in their midst. Still, our heroines suffered with resolve and constancy, never wavering in their love of their patria, no matter how many petty cruelties the detestable Acosta invented, arising stoically from their work each day when it was done to rest a few pitiful hours on the hard ground. Would you like to hear what our heroic women were given to eat? All while they were feeding the entire battalion of Veracruz and the entire cavalry of the region? One would think that at least these jailers would have wanted to keep them strong and healthy to be able to undertake such grueling work. Alas, they were given nothing in the morning. At noon, 2 tortillas each. At night, 2 more tortillas. And for the lot, a pound of raw meat without salt, taken from their own cattle. And not a day passed that they did not appear at roll call, between 2 columns of soldiers being called by their first and last names in the same way as the common soldiery. These heartless soldiers of tyranny, devoid of all humanity, permitted these poor women not an hour of rest, not even to nurse their children. In those rare moments when the women were left alone, they set themselves even more diligently to their work, so that they might finish it and share with each other a few moments of peaceful solace. They didn't dare cry or laugh in front of their jailers, who treated any such expressions as the gravest crime. To ensure that the women did not enjoy even a moment of free time, a major, Don Antonio Elosua, sent them 60 soldiers' uniforms to be repaired in the brief moments when they weren't grinding corn, but without thread and without needle. When the poor woman requested these things from their jailer, Acosta, his response was to drop his pants and tell them, "Here's your needle and thread." When such cruel and inhuman treatment overcame our sisters and they showed it, Acosta took it upon himself to whip each one. And sometimes he whipped them just for the hell of it. Eventually, this infernal minister of evil ran out of ways to inflict pain on the patriotic women, and so he resorted to more extreme, barbarous measures, the worst that you could imagine. He separated the children from their mothers and ordered them out into the street. When the women protested, Acosta threatened to bind them and send them to Arredondo for punishment if they so preferred, and so our children were run out into the street. This measure nearly destroyed the spirits of our women and tore out their heartstrings. They rent their garments and went half mad. But it was either release our children into the streets or hand them over to the chief tyrant, Arredondo. And so they sent them forth, these innocent children whose only crime was being their children, telling them tearfully, Go where they tell you, to the streets, wherever. This is what fate has decided. But what shall we eat? The children asked. Seek the kindness of others. Beg for alms was all they could tell them. With this bittersweet farewell, mothers and children were separated, drowning nearly in their tears, even as their jailer Acosta reveled in the beautiful scene he had authored. He then cut short their prayers, yelling at them, Get to work, whores! I am your God now. I am the God of whores. Yo soy el Dios de las putas. And he ordered them back to their workstations, whipping them, knocking them over, forcing them to grind their corn. Behold all true Mexican women who love their patria, and you may learn how to suffer for liberty and independence. For 54 days, our women endured La Quinta, 20 for the women captured at the Trinity River. Even when they were released, they found no respite from their suffering. They were strangers in the bosom of their patria. They were given neither water to drink, food to eat, nor even a shack to sleep in. Everything had been taken from them. Their houses, their fields, their livestock, their personal belongings, all for the supposed crime of independence. Even now, as we at last enjoy our independence, their property has not been restored to them. Instead, it remains in the hands of those who victimized them, who never suffered, who never fought for our cause, and yet who now co-opt their suffering in the name of the independence they so sternly opposed.
Thank you for listening. A special thanks this episode to my friend and co-translator on this piece, Brian Stauffer with the General Land Office. Brian's a phenomenal scholar of this period and a spectacular resource for making sense of some of these old documents. There's not an episode that goes by that I don't have a chance to be grateful for his contributions. Editing for this episode was performed by Susana Canseco, sound engineering by Stephen Bennett. A special thanks to my friend George Gaitan for letting us use his music on this series. You can find out more about him at georgegaitan.tripod.com. Thanks to my SWCA research buddies, Crystal Allgood, Rob Lackowitz, and Zachary Overfield, as well as to former San Antonio City archaeologist Kay Hines. Thanks to Brian Stauffer, our unofficial Old Spanish document transcriber, to Samantha Alanis, our cartographer-in-chief, to Cesar Gutierrez, our unofficial Archivo General de la Nación researcher, and to UTSA's Dean of Libraries, Dean Hendricks, our all-other document finder. And for more information about our podcast and other projects, check out www.brandonseal.com.